The chamber was laughing before Ambassador Coyle even finished reading the numbers. I heard it through 3 inches of ceremonial glass, that wet, clicking harmonic sound like a pipe organ swallowing itself. 7 species, 41 delegates, 1 shared joke, and the joke was us. I pressed my palm flat against the observation window and watched. Below me, the Galactic Council's grand chamber stretched out in concentric rings of tiered seating, each level occupied by a different delegation. The Veth sat closest to the center, 7-limbed, iridescent, gorgeous in the way that makes you feel like a parking violation. The Korathi occupied the upper tier, gray and angular, built like geometry had a bad day. The Senvari were taking notes, not combat notes. The kind of notes a scientist takes when a new species of insect does something unexpected. Anthropological notes. We were the insect. Ambassador Coyle stood at the central podium. He had soft hands, a Geneva education, a dark suit that cost more than my annual hazard pay. He was reading from the Earth Defense Corps submission document, fleet count, troop strength, weapons grade, territorial range, and his chin was up the whole time. Each number landed smaller than the last. I had those numbers memorized. I had spent 3 weeks helping compile them. 41 pages of honest accounting because the Council Charter required transparency from any species petitioning for protected status during an active conflict. We had given them everything, every ship, every soldier, every gun we had left. The Veth ambassador, the one the translation feed listed as high-voice Sarath, held up the holographic summary, a small spinning display, blue numbers on a dark field. He said something in Veth primary. The translation came through my earpiece half a second later. Is this their full military capacity, or a regional subdivision? Coyle said full capacity. The pipe organ swallowed itself again. I kept my hand on the glass. The cold of it spread into my palm and up my wrist, and I let it. 41. That was the number I was counting, not the fleet tonnage on that spinning display, not the troop figures Coyle was reading out with his chin up. 41 was my number, the unit I had gone in with on the first contact skirmish, the one the Council's official record lists as a navigational misunderstanding. The one that took 11 minutes and left me the only person in my squad who walked back to the transport. The Senvari delegate on the 3rd tier leaned toward his colleague and said something the translation feed clipped. What came through was, extraordinary loss tolerance for a pre-coalition species. Not a compliment, a data point. I pressed harder on the glass. Coyle was on the planetary defense grid breakdown now. The Korathi delegation had stopped looking at the display. One of them was reviewing what appeared to be a completely different document. We were, apparently, not interesting enough to follow in real time. We were a footnote being read aloud in a room that had already moved on. There is a particular kind of insult that does not announce itself. It does not raise its voice. It just continues doing something else while you speak. I had grown up with that insult. I had learned to store it somewhere quiet and useful. A junior Senvari delegate, young by their standards, which meant his secondary color hadn't fully come in, paused his note-taking. He looked up at the display. He looked back at his document. He looked up again. He said in standard, "They lost that many and kept fighting." He was not addressing anyone in particular. He was talking to himself. The translation feed caught it anyway. No one answered him. Coyle finished the submission. He thanked the Council for their time. He stepped back from the podium. His chin was still up. I respected that more than anything else I saw that day. The pipe organ clicked and rippled through one final harmonic laugh. I took my hand off the glass. The shape of my palm stayed there for a moment in the cold, a ghost of contact before it faded. I looked at it. 41. So we do this. I was not supposed to be in the observation gallery. My orders had me in the Earth delegation staging area, A low room 3 floors down with folding chairs and a coffee machine that had been broken since we landed on Council Space Verath. Someone had taped a handwritten note to it that said, "I'm sorry," and left a packet of instant powder on top as a kind of memorial offering. That packet was gone by day 2. Sergeant Owen Cole had eaten it dry. He said it tasted like regret. He said it was fine. Cole was the reason I had found the observation gallery. He had mapped the entire station the first night we arrived, the way he mapped every new space, systematically, quietly, and without being asked. He had pressed a hand-drawn diagram into my palm the next morning with a finger pressed to his lips. 3 floors up, second corridor left, push the door marked maintenance. The glass is one way. Nobody checks it. Cole was good at finding exits. He was good at finding high ground. He was good at being in the right place before anyone knew the right place mattered. He had been doing it since before I knew him, which was before the skirmish, which was before the 41 became the number I counted in dark windows. I did not go back to the staging area after the session. I stayed in the gallery until the chamber emptied and the lights dimmed to their overnight setting, and the spinning blue display winked out and left me in near dark with the ghost of my palm print on the glass. The junior Senvari delegate had left his notes on his seat. I could not read them from this distance. I looked at them anyway. I thought about what he had said. They lost that many and kept fighting. He had sounded confused, genuinely confused, the way you sound when something does not compute, not because you are dismissing it, but because your model has no category for it, and the absence of the category is disorienting. He had not said it with admiration. He had not said it with contempt. He had said it the way you say something when the data does not match the expected outcome, and you need to say it out loud to make sure you read it right. I thought, you have not seen anything yet. Not as a threat, not as a promise. Just as a fact, sitting quiet in the dark, patient as stone. Because the thing is, we are not impressive on paper. We never have been. The numbers in Coyle's submission document were honest and they were small. Our fleet was a fraction of the Korathi Standard Combat Group. Our troop strength was, by galactic scale, a rounding error. Our weapons technology was, the Council report had noted in a preliminary assessment, functionally adequate for intrasystem conflict. Functionally adequate. I had cut my hand on functionally adequate when I was pulling Corporal Nadia ore out of a burning transport on Kellen Station. Functionally adequate had been the rifle that jammed twice and fired true 6 times in 11 minutes, and those 6 times were the reason I was standing here in the dark instead of on a list. The chamber was empty now. The Korathi tier looked like geometry waiting for something to happen. The Senvari notes sat on the empty seat. The Veth's central podium was clean and dark. I said out loud to nobody, "We know." Not the numbers, not the fleet count, not the weapons grade. We know what the junior delegate couldn't file in his notes. We know what doesn't show up in the submission document. We know it the way you know your own weight, not by measuring it, but by feeling it every morning when you stand up. I put my hand back on the glass. The shape stayed longer this time, or I stayed longer, I am not sure which. Outside, Council Space Verath spun slow and enormous in the dark, lit from below by the planet it orbited, and I stood there watching it the way you watch something that has decided you are not worth watching back. That was fine. We had been not worth watching before. We knew how that ended. So we do this. Cole was waiting outside the staging area when I finally came down. He had 2 packets of the instant coffee powder. He had found a supply locker somewhere, because of course he had, and he held one out without a word. I took it. We stood in the corridor and ate dry, instant coffee powder in the dark, like 2 people who had made peace with being a rounding error. "How was the session?" he said. "They laughed," I said. He nodded. He had expected that. We had both expected that. You do not walk into a room where you are the smallest thing and expect not to be laughed at. You walk in because the room exists and you have the right to be in it, and the laugh is just the weather. The Sinvari one asked a question, I said. Which one? The young one, junior delegate. He asked why we kept fighting after the losses. Cole chewed his powder. What did they say? Nothing, nobody answered. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, good answer. I looked at him. He shrugged. Silence is a good answer, makes them think. I thought about the spinning blue display, the numbers, the pipe organ laugh, the junior delegate's face. Cole held out a second powder packet. Found 6 more, he said. There's a supply locker by the environmental processing unit on sub-level 3. Of course there was. I took the second packet. We ate it in the corridor and said nothing else, and that was enough, because we were the kind of people who did not need to say the thing out loud. The thing was already said. It had been said 41 times over, in the names I carried, in the cold of the glass, in the silence that nobody in that chamber had been able to answer. They mocked the tiny army. Outside, the planet turned. We stood in the corridor eating dry powder, and we were still standing. That was the whole point. The next morning, Coyle called the delegation together. He had received the council's preliminary response to the submission, a form document, standard language, nothing binding. He read it carefully. He set it down. He said, they have offered us observer status. Someone in the back said, what does that mean? Coyle said, it means they will watch us. He picked up the document again. He said, let them. Cole caught my eye across the room. I ate the last of my powder. So we do this. The moon was called Calyx 4. Nobody had named it anything better because nobody had stayed long enough to care. And the first Earth survey team had apparently been in too much of a hurry to do more than log the coordinates. And note that the soil read clean and the air was breathable, and the gravity was close enough that you would not notice the difference until the 3rd week when your knees started complaining. My knees had been complaining since the 2nd week. I set down my pack outside what was technically Barracks C and looked at what was technically a military installation, and felt something I did not have a clean word for. Not despair. Not pride. Something in the middle, the way you feel when someone you love does something deeply impractical and deeply them, and you cannot decide whether to stop them or stand back and watch. The base was a construction in progress. Half the prefab walls were up. The perimeter had been marked but not fenced. 2 soldiers were arguing about the placement of the communications array, while a third sat on a crate nearby eating something out of a foil packet and offering occasional suggestions that neither of the other 2 wanted. Between Barracks C and the armory, in a strip of cleared ground that had no tactical purpose, someone had started a garden. Not a metaphorical garden, an actual one. Small, careful rows, something green already coming up. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Vreth 6 appeared at my shoulder. He had been doing that since he was embedded with us at the transit station, materializing at my shoulder without sound, like geometry that had learned to walk. The Korathi built like that. All angles and efficiency, no wasted motion. He had 4 upper limbs and used them all with a precision that made you aware of how approximate human movement was by comparison. He was looking at the garden. He said, what is the tactical function of this? It was not a question. His standard had no inflection for questions. Everything came out flat, like a statement waiting to be corrected. I said, there isn't one. He looked at me. I said, someone wanted a garden. He opened the small recording device he kept clipped to his upper right limb and made a note. I did not ask what the note said. I had stopped asking after the first day, when I realized his notes were going to be accurate and unflattering, and there was nothing I could do about either quality. The base had been Vreth 6's idea, or rather, the Korathi Council's idea, relayed through him. An embedded observer, officially neutral, officially just watching. The Earth Command had agreed because you agree to things when you are the smallest item on the agenda, and the price of saying no is invisibility. Vreth 6 had arrived with 2 cases of equipment, a recording device, and an expression that I had eventually cataloged as the Korathi equivalent of barely contained disbelief. He was cataloging our failures. His report, I knew, would be meticulous. I walked him through the base. The armory was half-stocked, functional, organized in a system that made sense only to the corporal who had set it up, Nadia Orr, back from Kellen Station with a new scar across her left hand and an organizational philosophy she could defend at length and had already done so twice. Vreth 6 looked at the layout. He made a note. The communications array was still being argued over. We walked past it. The 2 soldiers paused their argument long enough to nod at me and look at Vreth 6 with the particular expression humans use when they are being observed by something that finds them interesting for the wrong reasons. Vreth 6 made a note. The medical bay was too large. He stopped in the entrance and looked at it for a long time. It was a full third bigger than the standard installation layout for a base this size. It had more beds than the current roster justified. It had supplies staged for patient loads we did not yet have. He said, "This is disproportionate to your current troop count." I said, "Yes." He said, "The resources allocated here reduce capacity elsewhere." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I thought about Kellen Station, 11 minutes, 41. I said, "Because we plan for the number we are going to need, not the number we have." He made a note. At the end of the corridor, just before the medical bay opened into the main treatment area, someone had started the memorial wall. It was a plain section of prefab paneling. Names handwritten in black marker, dates, coordinates, small private things, a unit number, a nickname, a drawing of something that might have been a dog. It had been up for 4 days. It already covered half the panel. Vreth 6 stood in front of it for a long time. He said, "You dedicate resources to the dead." Not a question, but not a statement either. Something in between, something his standard did not have the architecture for. I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I said, "So they know where they are." He looked at me. His secondary limbs moved a small, folding motion that I had learned meant processing. Then he made a note, and we moved on. Corporal Lucy Dale found us in the East Corridor. She was 23 and from a small town in the north of England, and she had the kind of cheerfulness that was not naivety. It was a decision, made daily, in full knowledge of the alternative. She was also running structural logistics for the entire base, while simultaneously teaching a rotating group of 3 other soldiers to make something she called a proper soup. She had a camp stove. She had foil packets of various ingredients she had sourced from somewhere that I chose not to investigate. She had opinions about broth temperature. She extended a hand to Vreth 6. He looked at the hand. She kept it extended, patient, cheerful, entirely unbothered. He placed one of his upper limbs against it in the approximation of a handshake. She shook it once and let go and said, "Nice to meet you. Do you eat?" He said, "I process nutrition in a different form." She said, "I'll figure something out," and she walked back to her stove. Vreth 6 made a note. I showed him the rest of the base. The power units, the water reclamation, the communication relay. Each one functional, none of them elegant. The kind of installation that a more advanced species would have built in a third of the time with a third of the argument. We had built it with too many conversations and too many opinions and one garden that served no tactical purpose. At the end of the tour, Vreth 6 stood at the edge of the base perimeter and looked out at the moon's flat terrain and the low, bruised sky. He had his recording device open. He had been making notes for 4 hours. He said, "Your installation is disorganized." I said, "Yes." He said, "Your personnel make decisions based on personal criteria rather than strategic optimization." I said, "Mostly." He said, Your resource allocation is irrational. I said some of it. He said, you are not a coherent threat profile. I said nothing. He made one final note, closed the device, and went to his assigned quarters. I stood at the perimeter and looked at the same flat terrain and the same bruised sky and thought about his notes. He was not wrong about any of it. Not the garden, not the oversized medical bay, not Lucy Dale and her camp stove. Not the memorial wall, not the argument about the communications array, not the fact that we had put the coffee maker in before the secondary weapons locker, because 3 people had insisted, and eventually the installation team had made a democratic decision at 9 in the morning with no caffeine in them, and the coffee maker won. He was not wrong about any of it. He just did not have the right framework for what he was looking at. The base was not optimized. It was not clean. It was not the coherent threat profile of a species that had its act together. It was the thing we built when we knew we were going to be there for a long time. It was the thing we built when we knew some of us would not come back, and we wanted there to be a place to put their names. It was the thing we built with a garden between the barracks and the armory because someone looked at the soil and thought, clean, something could grow here. We built what we were, we always did. The Korathi built threat profiles, we built places. I did not write that down, I did not need to. The strike came at 3:40. I heard it before I felt it, a percussion that moved through the ground before it moved through the air, the kind of impact that your bones register before your brain does. I was out of my bunk before the second hit, boots on, weapon in hand, corridor. Cole was already in the corridor. He had a map. Of course he had a map. East perimeter, he said. 2 points of entry. They are probing, not committing. Numbers. Small, fast movers. No heavy equipment. Raiders. The kind that tested edges. The kind that wanted to know where the soft spots were before they brought something larger. 11 minutes. That was the number in my head as I moved. 11 minutes was how long a probe engagement lasted before it either escalated or withdrew. 11 minutes was how long Kellan Station had lasted. 11 minutes was a unit of time I had reorganized my entire sense of the world around. The base was awake. Not in the clean, coordinated way a better drilled installation would come awake. It was our kind of awake, which meant 3 people were already at the armory, 2 were still pulling boots on. One was trying to reach the communications array to get a signal out, and Lucy Dale was in the medical bay standing at the door with her hands ready and her stove cold and her soup unfinished. The armory took a hit. Smoke, not fire. Nadia Orr went in anyway to pull what was needed and came back out with her other hand now matching the scar on the first. She did not mention it. The east perimeter held for 6 minutes, took pressure, held for 3 more, and then the raiders withdrew. Not defeated. Testing complete. They had what they needed and they left. The whole thing lasted 9 minutes and 40 seconds. I stood in the east perimeter after and counted what we had. The armory was scorched on the outside and functional on the inside. Barracks A was rubble, a direct hit. Nobody in it when it landed because Cole's map had put everyone else somewhere else. 2 injuries, neither serious. Vreth 6 was standing in the garden. I walked over. The garden was still there. The small, careful rows, the green already coming up. The clean soil untouched because nothing had fallen within 20 meters of it, not by design, just by the particular luck or math of where the hits had landed. Vreth 6 was looking at it. I said nothing. He said nothing. He had his recording device in his upper right limb. It was closed. I went to check on Nadia Orr's hands. Behind me, Vreth 6 was still standing in the garden when the base lights came back up and the bruised sky started going pale at the edges. His device was still closed. He stood there for a long time. I found out later that he did not update his report that night. His quarters light was on until morning. I saw it from across the yard, when I came out to check the perimeter, and I thought about his notes, the disorganized base, the irrational allocation, the incoherent threat profile, and I thought about the garden still growing between the barracks and the armory and the medical bay that had been too large, and had been exactly large enough in the memorial wall with its names and its coordinates and its small drawings of things that might have been dogs. I thought, now he is running new numbers. I thought, good. The coffee maker was still working. Someone had made a full pot. I poured a cup and stood in the corridor and drank it and looked at the light in Vreth 6's window and felt the kind of quiet that is not emptiness but fullness. The full weight of everything being exactly as hard as expected and continuing anyway. The green thing in the garden was still growing. We were still standing. Corporal Lucy Dale found me the next morning with a new row planted, and a list of supplies she wanted, and an expression that said she already knew how I was going to respond. She said, I need a grow light. I said, we don't have a grow light. She said, I know where they keep the spare parts for the environmental array. There are components I could modify. I looked at her. She held the list out patiently. I took it. The thing about Lucy Dale and her garden and her camp stove and her soup. The thing Vreth 6 had put in his notes as irrational, as non-strategic, as the behavior of a species that did not understand resource priority, was that it was all of those things, and it was also the mechanism by which 11 people on this base were able to stand up every morning and do their jobs. Not because soup fixed anything, not because green rows in the dirt changed the tactical situation. Because it was ours, because it was alive, because someone had looked at this moon and this dirt and this thin, bruised sky and thought, something could grow here. We were that species. We had always been that species. I told her to get the components. She was already walking. The supply locker Cole had found on sub-level 3 had 4 more packets of instant coffee. He had rationed them. He gave one to me and one to Nadia Orr, who drank it dry the way Cole did, and kept 2 in his pocket for later because Cole always thought about later. I drank mine standing at the perimeter, looking out at the flat terrain, thinking about the raid and the 9 minutes and 40 seconds, and the raiders who had gotten what they came for and left. They had tested our edges. They did not know that we do not have edges. We have names on a wall and a garden between the barracks and the armory, and a medical bay that was too large and a coffee maker that won a democratic vote at 9 in the morning, and a corporal who was currently modifying environmental array components to grow something green under an alien sky. That is not a threat profile. It is worse. So we do this. The tactical room was a rectangle of light and red. Mostly red. The map covered every wall, a 3-dimensional projection that the system updated every 4 minutes, each update adding more red markers than the last. I stood at the back of the room and watched the colors and did the math I had been doing since the first markers appeared 12 hours ago, and every time I did the math I got the same answer, and the answer was not good. Someone had written on the whiteboard in black marker, big enough to read from where I stood. We've been in worse. Below it in different handwriting. No, we haven't. Below that, in a third hand, slanting slightly uphill the way someone writes when they are using a surface that is not quite at the right height. Yeah, but we didn't know that at the time. I looked at it for a moment, then I went to the front of the room. The Korathi force was not a probe. It was not a test. It was coordinated, committed, and moving in 3 simultaneous columns that the intelligence feed had been tracking for 36 hours, since the moment they crossed the outer marker, and the tracking system had gone from amber to the particular shade of red that means stop asking questions and start making decisions. The numbers were in the display. I had looked at them long enough to memorize them, and then I had stopped looking at them, because There is a point at which the numbers are not telling you anything useful anymore, and looking at them is just a way of using time you do not have. Our people needed to know what they were doing and why. They did not need to know the ratio. I gave the briefing. Every position had a name. I gave the name. Then I gave the name of the last person who had held that position before this engagement, the person's full name, rank, where they were from if I knew it, what they had done in the 11 minutes at Kellan Station, or the 9 minutes and 40 seconds at Calix 4, or the engagements before that, the ones that also did not make the official record. I was not reading from a document. I had them memorized, all of them. This is what the Senvari delegate had not been able to file in his notes. This is what Vreth 6's report had no category for. We did not fight the engagement in front of us. We fought the accumulated weight of every engagement behind us. We were not one force in one moment. We were every force we had ever been, stacked. At the end of the briefing I said, "We hold until we are told or until we are not. That is all." That was all. We had been told. We went to our positions. Vreth 6 was in the tactical room when I returned after the first hour. He was observing, as his embed status required. He had his recording device. He had been documenting the briefing and the preparations, and the initial contact reports with the same meticulous, flat precision he applied to everything. I sat down next to him. He said, "Your briefing included information with no tactical function." I said, "Which part?" He said, "The names, the histories. This does not alter the positions or the capabilities." I said, "No." He said, "It is not efficient." I said, "No." He looked at the map. The red markers were moving. Our blue markers were stationary. The gap between them was closing at a rate that his Korathi tactical training would have already calculated to a very precise and unpleasant conclusion. He said, "What does it do?" I said, "It tells everyone in this room that the person before them thought it was worth doing. That's enough." He looked at me. I looked at the map. He made a note. The first 8 hours were the kind of hard that does not have a clean description, not the sharp, immediate hard of a 9-minute probe. The slow, compressing hard of a sustained engagement, where you hold a position and the pressure on that position increases by increments, and each increment is manageable, and then the next one is manageable, and you keep discovering that manageable is not the same as easy, and that the difference between them is not a gap you can measure. It is a gap you fall through without knowing you are falling until you are already on the other side. Owen Cole held the north position with 9 people and a communications line that cut in and out for the first 4 hours. I got fragments, enough to know they were holding, not enough to know how. Cole was good at holding. He was good at finding exits, yes. High ground, yes. The right place before it mattered, yes. But the thing that made Cole Cole, the thing that the numbers never captured, was that he could look at a position that did not look holdable and find the particular angle of it that was, not by changing the position, by seeing it differently, by asking, "What does this place have that the map does not show?" He always found something. At hour 9, the communications line from the north position went clear for 6 consecutive minutes, and Cole gave me a full status report in the flat, efficient language of someone who has not slept, and does not plan to, and has decided that is fine. He said, "We are holding. We have taken losses. We are still holding." I said, "Numbers." He gave me the numbers. I put them somewhere quiet and useful. He said, "The Korathi are not retreating. They are adjusting. They expected faster progress." I said, "Good." He said, "Their adjustment will increase pressure on your position." I said, "Good." He said, "That is not the expected response." I said, "If they are spending time adjusting, they are not advancing. Every hour we hold is an hour that costs them something. The cost is the point." A pause. He said, "Understood. Then, The north position has a view. You can see the whole valley from up here. I said, is it good? He said, it is something. That was Cole's version of beautiful. I filed it. The communication line cut out again. I went back to my position. At hour 37, my communication unit stopped working. Not dramatically. It did not spark or smoke. It simply stopped, the way things stop when they have been running past their tolerance for too long, and the last request was one request more than they had left to give. The display went dark. The feed cut. Silence. I looked at it. Then I tore through my kit, looking for my tactical stylus. I had carried it since basic training. It was a standard issue marking tool, black, hexagonal, worn smooth on one side where I had been holding it wrong for 11 years. I used it to mark physical maps when the display systems were down, which was more often than the equipment specifications suggested it would be. I had used it at Kellen Station. I had used it at Calix 4. I had used it in 3 engagements the official record did not acknowledge. It was not in the first pocket. Not in the second. I went through my kit with both hands, ignoring the percussion of the engagement outside, ignoring the shouts from the secondary position 20 meters to my left, ignoring the way the light was shifting because something large had impacted something structural, going through pocket after pocket after pocket. Not there. I found it in the inner lining of my jacket, wedged into a seam. I held it. My hands were steady. For a moment, just that one moment, I was fine. Then I got up and started directing my unit by hand signals. Hand signals are older than any technology we brought to this moon. They are older than almost anything we had in that engagement. They are the language of people who have been in situations where everything else failed and something still needed to be said. Every human military tradition had its own version of them, and the versions were different in their specifics and identical in their logic. The body can speak when the voice cannot. My unit knew the signals. We had practiced them, not because we thought we would need them, but because Cole had insisted, and Cole was always right about what you needed before you knew you needed it. We held the position. We held it with hand signals and a tactical stylus and 11 people who knew the names of the ones who had held it before them. At hour 41, something changed in the engagement. Not on our end. Nothing changed on our end. We were doing what we had been doing, holding, adjusting, holding. The change was in the pressure. It did not increase. It plateaued. And then, incrementally, it began not to decrease exactly, but to hesitate. Pressure that hesitates is pressure that is questioning itself. I felt it before I understood it. The communication channel request came through on Nadia Orr's unit, which was still working, because Nadia Orr's equipment always worked, because she had opinions about maintenance that she had also expressed at length on multiple occasions. The identifier was Korathi command level. I said, put it through. The voice that came through the channel was not translated by an automated system. It was translated by a Korathi linguist working in real time, which meant there was a half-second delay, and the phrasing came out slightly formal, slightly stiff. The voice said, "This is Sigma-Mouth, 4th Command Tier, Korathi Advance Force. I am requesting communication with your command authority." I said, "Speaking." A pause, possibly surprise. I did not know if Korathi Command expected to reach a sergeant and was adjusting to the information that yes, this was what they got. He said, "What are your acceptable losses?" I said, "All of them." Silence. Long. Sigma-Mouth said, "That is not a real answer." I said, "It is the only one we have." Another silence. Different quality. Not the silence of a bad connection. The silence of someone holding a new piece of information up to the light and finding that the light goes straight through it in a way that does not match any material they have worked with before. He said, "Your force has sustained significant losses over 41 hours." I said, yes. He said, your strategic position has not materially improved. I said, no. He said, then what is the objective? I looked at the whiteboard, the 3 lines, the third handwriting slanting slightly uphill. I said, to still be here when you ask that question. The channel stayed open for 11 seconds after that. I counted. Then it closed. 3 hours and 20 minutes later, the red markers began moving. Not advancing, not retreating, not officially, reallocating. That was the word the tracking system used, tactical reallocation. The whiteboard was still up when I came back into the tactical room. Someone had added a 4th line. Still don't know that, keep going. I read it twice. Cole was at the door with 2 packets of instant coffee powder, the last 2 from the locker on sub-level 3. He had been saving them. He held one out. I took it. I looked at the whiteboard. Outside, the red markers were moving. We were still standing. Vreth 6 had been on the document for 9 hours when I found him. His quarters were small. He had not asked for anything larger, and efficiency was the kind of value that extended into his personal space. 1 table, 1 surface for equipment, 1 surface for the recording device that he had filled 11 times and transferred to data storage each time. He worked the way he moved, without waste, without decoration, with the particular precision of a species that had decided long ago that the fastest line between a problem and its solution was the only line worth drawing. The document on his screen read, Assessment of Earth Combat Readiness, Revised. That was all. That was all it had read for 9 hours. The cursor blinked. I set a cup of tea on the table next to his recording device. Not coffee. We had run out of coffee 2 days ago, and I had found a small tin of tea in the supply locker that nobody had claimed, and I had made 2 cups, 1 for me and 1 for whatever this was. He looked at the cup. He did not drink it. He picked it up and held it, and the warmth transferred into his limbs, and he held it. I sat down on the floor on the other side of the table, my back against the wall, my own cup in both hands. I did not ask what he was working on. I did not ask why the document had 9 words in 9 hours. I knew what he was working on, and I knew why, and I sat on the floor and drank my tea. After a while he said, I have revised this document 12 times. I said, what does it say now? He said, the same 12 words it said at the beginning, the header and 1 data point. I said, which data point? He said, casualty absorption rate, nonlinear. I looked at my tea. He said, this is not a sufficient assessment. It does not capture the mechanism. I said, what is the mechanism? He was quiet for a moment. His secondary limbs did the small folding motion, processing. He said, I do not have a term for it in any language I work in. I said, what does it look like? He thought about that. His upper limbs shifted. He set the cup down and picked up the recording device and then set that down too, which was the most uncertain I had ever seen him. He said, it looks like a system that uses loss as fuel. I said nothing. He said, the Korathi tactical model assigns a weight to casualties. Each casualty reduces operational effectiveness by a calculable amount. Beyond a threshold, the force becomes non-functional. This is true for every species the model has assessed. I said, and us. He said, your operational effectiveness does not follow the reduction curve. The losses at Calyx 4 did not reduce your capacity. The losses in the 41-hour engagement did not reduce your capacity. In several measurable respects, your unit cohesion increased. I said yes. He said why? I thought about the briefing, the names, the positions, the handwriting on the whiteboard. I said because they are still here. He looked at me. I said we carry them. Everyone who is gone is still in the unit and what the people who remain do and why they do it. You do not just lose a person, you lose what they knew, what they held, and you pick that up. You add it to what you already carry. You do not get lighter, you get more. He processed this for a long time. He said, "This is not an efficient system." I said, "No." He said, "It should produce diminishing returns. Accumulated loss should degrade performance." I said, "It does. Eventually it does, but the threshold is different for us." He said, "What is the threshold?" I said, 0 reasons. He said, 0 reasons for what? I said, for continuing. We stop when we run out of reasons, not when we run out of people. He was quiet. The cursor on his screen blinked. He said, "I cannot quantify that." I said, "No." He said, "The assessment requires quantification." I said, "I know." He picked up the cup again. The tea was cooling. He held it anyway, the warmth still in it, still transferring. He said, "The junior Senvari delegate submitted his assessment 2 days ago. His conclusion was that Earth's military capacity is below the minimum threshold for sustained conflict." I said, "What did he recommend?" He said, "Observer-assisted withdrawal. He believes you cannot hold." I said, "He is using the wrong model." He said, "Yes," a pause, "I know this now." He set the cup down and opened the document and stared at the 9 words and the blinking cursor. I finished my tea. I set the cup on the floor. I looked at the memorial wall through the open door of his quarters, not the one in the medical bay corridor, but the small one someone had started in the east section, a second wall, because the first one was filling up. He said, "I saw what you wrote on the wall, the second wall." I had not written anything on the second wall. I had not needed to. The wall was not for me. He said, "The name of Corporal Cole, the coordinate." I looked at him. He said he was lost in the 41-hour engagement, hour 31, north position. I said, "Yes." He said, "His communication with you in hour 9 indicated the position was holding." I said it was. He said he reported losses and said the position was still holding. I said yes. He said, and then he continued to hold it for 22 more hours. I said yes. His secondary limbs folded tight and then released, his version of a long exhale. He said he sent you the status report knowing. I said I think so. He said, why did he not report the full status? I said because the position was still holding. That was the full status. The cursor blinked. Vreth 6 put his limb on the input surface. He held it there without typing. He said, the Senvari delegate asked me for my preliminary findings this morning. He expects confirmation of his assessment. I said, what will you tell him? He said that his model is wrong, that the mechanism of Earth's combat capacity cannot be assessed by the current metric system. I said, what metric will you use? He said, I don't know yet. He started typing. Not the assessment. Something else first, notes, long ones, filling the document in a different way than before. Not quantified, not scored. The kind of notes that were trying to describe something the existing vocabulary did not have a shape for. I watched him for a moment. Then I picked up both cups and went to find somewhere to wash them, because we were the kind of people who washed cups. The Senvari delegate found me the next afternoon. His name was rendered in standard as something close to Vel, not his full name, which was long and required 2 additional vocal registers that human mouths did not produce, but the fragment he offered to species who could not manage the rest. He was young. His secondary color was still coming in. He had a data pad and the expression of someone who had drawn a conclusion and needed it confirmed. He said, Sergeant Osimensa, I have reviewed the engagement data. I said, good. He said, my assessment concludes that Earth's current military posture is unsustainable. The loss rate over the 41-hour engagement. I said, I know the loss rate. He stopped. I said, I know every name on that rate. I know what position they held and who they held it with and what the position was doing when they stopped holding it. You have a number. I have something more specific than a number. He was quiet for a moment. He said, my assessment. I said, your assessment uses the wrong denominator. He looked at me. I said, you are calculating what we have lost against what we had. That is one way to read it. The other way is to calculate what we are carrying against what we are holding. The number looks different from that direction. He was quiet for longer this time. He said, what is Vreth 6's assessment? I said, you'll have to ask him. He looked at his data pad. He looked at me. He looked back at the data pad. He said, the junior delegate does not usually revise. I said, no. He said, he has submitted 3 revisions. I said, yes. He said, the last revision contains no numbers. I said, I know. He stood with his data pad for a moment, and in the particular quality of his silence, I recognized something I had seen before, in the tactical room at hour 41, on the other end of the channel, in the pause before a question that did not have a clean answer. Running new numbers, finding that the new numbers also do not land where expected, having to go back and run them again. I said, how long have your people been studying us? He said, since first contact, 14 months. I said, what did you conclude? He said, pre-coalition species, limited military capacity, high conflict tendency, projected stabilization within. I said, before the engagement. What did you conclude before the engagement? He stopped. He said that you could not hold. I said, and now? He looked at his data pad, at the numbers on it, at whatever the numbers were doing now that they were not doing what they were supposed to do. He said, now I don't know what you are. I said, we are what's still here. I left him in the corridor. He was still standing there when I turned the corner. That night, Nadia Orr and Lucy Dale and 2 others whose names I will put on a wall somewhere sat outside Barrack C on crates and talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with the engagement. I came and went. I heard fragments, someone's family, someone's plan for when this was over, someone's strong opinion about a film they had watched 6 months ago on a transit ship and could not let go of. The garden was still growing. Not fast, not dramatically. Small, careful green in the alien soil under the grow light that Lucy had built from components she was not supposed to have used for that purpose, and which I had approved because I was the wrong rank to be making that call and made it anyway. I sat next to it for a while. The cool of the moon's night came in from the perimeter. I thought about Cole on the North Ridge at hour 9, telling me the view was something. I thought about the second wall, his name, his coordinate. I thought about Vreth 6 still writing, and the cursor blinking, and 12 words that had not been enough, and the document that was now 30 pages long and still not done. I put my hand in the soil of the garden, not to pull anything, just to feel what was there. It was cool, clean. Something was growing. We were still here. In the morning, Vreth 6's report was submitted to the council. The title was Assessment of Earth Combat Readiness, Revised, a Request for New Metrics. The summary, the part the council would read first, was 1 paragraph, not numbers, a statement. It said that the standard loss tolerance metric did not apply to Earth forces, that the mechanism by which Earth units sustained combat effectiveness under sustained attrition was not captured by existing modeling tools, that the council was operating on an assumption that loss reduces capacity, which was true for every species the model had been built on, and was not true here, and that this was not a small discrepancy in the data but a foundational one, and that any assessment built on the existing model was not wrong by a margin of error but wrong in its premise. Vell told me, what the council's response was. He came to find me the morning the response arrived, and he stood in front of me with his data pad and the expression of someone who was no longer sure what expression to use. He said, "The council has requested a secondary assessment from an independent body." I said, "Which body?" He said, "They asked the VETH." I said, "All right." He said, "The VETH declined." I looked at him. He said, "High Voice Sarath submitted a single-line response. It said, 'Read VRETH 6's report again, more carefully.'" I said nothing. He said, "The chamber was very quiet after that." I thought about the pipe organ, the wet, clicking laugh, the spinning blue display with our numbers on it. He said, "I have submitted my own revised assessment." I said, "What did it conclude?" He said, "That I need more time." I said, "All right." He said, "That is not a conclusion, it is an admission." I said, "Sometimes that is the same thing." He looked at me for a moment. He said, the second wall, is there room on it?" I said, "There is always room." He said, "I want to add a name. I want to add Cole's name, with the proper notation of rank and position and engagement, in my script alongside yours." I looked at him. He held his data pad. On the screen in Korathi script a name, a coordinate, a date. I said yes. We went to the wall together. The treaty room did not look like a room where things ended. It looked like a room where things sat across from each other and tried to find the shape of a shared future without agreeing to call it that. Long table, chairs on two sides, a light source in the ceiling that produced something close enough to sunlight that your body thought it was morning no matter when you arrived. I was the wrong rank for the table. Everybody in the room knew it. The Earth delegation's senior advisors had arranged the seating with the careful precision of people who understood protocol, and had spent 3 days making the correct introductions to the correct people. And I was not in any of the correct categories, and my presence at this table was the result of a single quiet conversation between Ambassador Coyle and the Earth Defense Corps Chief of Staff, the content of which I was not told and did not ask about. What I knew was that Coyle had come to find me personally. He had soft hands and a Geneva education, and his chin had been up in every room I had ever seen him enter. He had come to my quarters the night before the first session and stood in the doorway and said, "I need someone the other side has met." I said, "All right." He said, "You are not expected to speak unless I ask." I said, "All right." He looked at me for a moment in that particular way that people look at you when they want to ask something and have decided not to. He said, "Thank you, Sergeant." He left. I spent the evening looking at the second wall. Vreth 6 was across the table. He saw me when I entered. He had been seated for 4 minutes. I knew because I had timed it. The way you time things when you are the wrong rank in the right room, and you want to be precise about everything that is within your control. He nodded once. I nodded back. We had not spoken since the morning I left him at his quarters with the empty cups. We had not needed to. His report had said what needed saying. The council's silence had said the rest. The planet had kept turning and we had kept standing, and now we were here, at this table, with the particular light that told your body it was morning. The Korathi lead negotiator was a senior command figure whose name came out in standard as something close to Arath, the same translation convention as Vel, a fragment offered to the mouths that could not manage the whole. He was older than Sigma Mouth, which I could tell by the way the gray of him had gone lighter at the edges, the Korathi equivalent of age visible in color rather than skin. He moved with the precision of a species that had negotiated many things and expected to negotiate many more. He had a document, the Korathi opening position. He set it in the center of the table. He said, "We are prepared to discuss terms of withdrawal and a defined boundary agreement. The Council has indicated willingness to support a ceasefire framework under these parameters." Coyle received the document. He looked at it without expression. He said, "Thank you." He set it aside. He put the Earth counter-proposal in the center of the table. It was 7 pages. The first page was a list of names. Arith looked at it. He looked at Coyle. He looked at the document. He said, "This is not a legal document." Coyle said, "It is now." Arith picked it up. He read the first page. He read the second page, which continued the list. He turned to the third page, and the list continued there too, and he turned to the fourth, where the list ended and the actual terms began, and he set it down. He said, "You have attached a casualty record to a treaty proposal." Coyle said, "Yes." He said, "This has no legal precedent in any framework the Council recognizes." Coyle said, "We are establishing the precedent." Arith looked at Vreth 6. Vreth 6 looked at the document. He said in Korathi something that the translation feed rendered as, "Read it, all of it." Arith looked at him. Vreth 6 said, "I mean all of it." There was a quality in that room. I have sat in rooms with high ceilings before, rooms where the architecture itself absorbs sound in a way that makes silence feel larger, and the silence after that was large in exactly that way. Not empty, full. The full weight of something being understood and the understanding not being comfortable. Arith picked up the document again. He read it, all of it. The list of names and then the terms, which were not generous and not punitive, which were instead specific in a way that I recognized from Vreth 6's revised report, specific in the way that things are specific when they have been lived rather than modeled. He set it down. He said, "The Council will need time to review." Coyle said, "Yes." He said, "The list." He stopped. He picked up the document again. He looked at a specific page. He turned to a different page. He looked between them. He said, "The losses on this list, the ones from the 41-hour engagement." Coyle said, "Yes." He said, "Your force increased its numbers after this engagement." Coyle said, "Yes." A long pause. He said, "How?" Coyle said, "Nomming the dead and recruiting in the same ceremony." The room was very quiet. Arith looked at the list. He set it down. He looked at nothing in particular for a moment in the way that someone looks when the thing they are understanding is not a new piece of information, but a new way of understanding all the old information at once, and the new way does not fit the shape of the old understanding, and something has to give. He said, "I want to understand this." I said, "Sir." It was the first word I had spoken in the room. Coyle looked at me. He had said I was not expected to speak unless asked. He had not told me I could not. The distinction was small, and I had decided to live in it. Arith looked at me. I said, "We do not stop when we lose people. We carry them forward. The weight is real, and it is something we run on. You are looking for the point where the weight stops us. There isn't one." He said, "There must be a threshold." I said, "0 reasons. That is the threshold, not 0 people. 0 reasons to continue." He said, "And you have not reached it." I said, "No." He said, "How many reasons do you have?" I thought about the garden, the whiteboard, the 4th line of handwriting, Lucy Dale and her camp stove, Cole and his maps, Nadia Orr and her scarred hands, the walls, both of them, full of names and coordinates and small drawings of things that might have been dogs. I said, "Enough." The room held that. Arith looked at Vreth 6. Vreth 6 looked at me. I looked at the window, at the planet below, half in shadow, the line between light and dark moving slow as a breath across it. I was thinking about whether anyone had watered Lucy's garden. I forced myself back. Arith said, "We will review the document." He stood. He picked up the Earth counter-proposal. The list of names. He held it both limbs, with a care that was not protocol and was not diplomatic courtesy. It was something else. The kind of care you use with a thing that has weight you did not expect. He said, "We will read all of it." He left. The session broke for the day. In the corridor outside, Vel fell into step beside me. He was not part of his delegation's formal team at this stage. He was an observer still, the junior delegate who had asked a question in the council chamber and not gotten an answer. He said, "The document." I said, "Yes." He said, "The names, all those names." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why submit them? The treaty terms are what matter legally." I said, "Because the terms are the agreement and the names are the reason. You do not separate the reason from the agreement. The reason is the agreement." He was quiet. He said, "In Senvari legal tradition, the parties to a treaty are the living. The dead are not parties." I said, "In ours they are." He said, "How?" I said, "Because we are still acting on what they started. That makes them parties." He walked beside me for 3 more paces and then stopped. I kept walking. Coyle found me at the window, the planet below half in shadow turning. He stood next to me and looked at it. He said, "Well." I said, "Yes." He said, "We made it strange for them." I said, "Yes." He said, "Is that enough?" I thought about Arith holding the document with both hands with that careful, unexpected care. I said, "I think they stopped laughing." He said, "They stopped in the 41-hour engagement, before the treaty room." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you know when?" I said, "When Sigmamouth asked me what our acceptable losses were, and I said all of them." Coyle was quiet for a moment. He said, "That was an honest answer." I said, "It was the only one we had." He looked at the planet. The shadow line moved, patient, constant, without concern for what we thought about it. He said, "The second session is tomorrow. Arith will come back with revisions." I said, "I know." He said, "The names will stay in the document." I said, "I know." He said, "Good night, Sergeant." He left. I stayed at the window. The signing happened on the 3rd day. Not with ceremony. Not the way you imagine it, no speeches, no formal tableau, no grand image for the record. Arith sat down across from Coyle and put the revised document on the table, and Coyle read it and made 2 small notations, and they went back and forth on the wording of one clause for 40 minutes. The kind of technical, specific, slightly airless conversation that produces binding agreements. At the end, Coyle signed, Arith signed, the council observers signed. Vreth 6, as the embedded observer, signed as witness. He signed in both standard and Korathi script. He looked at the document for a moment after, just a moment. Then he closed the cover and passed it to the clerk. He looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying that had not already been said on walls and in 9 hours of a blinking cursor, and in a name written in 2 scripts on a panel in the east section of a base on a moon where the soil was clean. The list of names stayed in the document. It was not a precedent that anyone in the room could find language to call legal. It became legal anyway, the way things become legal when enough people agree that the weight of something real outweighs the weight of any existing rule about what is allowed to be real. I walked out of the building into the moon's thin afternoon. The light was low, and the ground was the particular flat gray-brown of a world that had not decided yet what it wanted to be. The air was breathable. The gravity was close enough that after 3 weeks your knees started complaining. My knees were complaining. I found a wall. Not a memorial wall. Not a wall with names on it. Just the outer wall of the building we had signed in, prefab, standard issue. The same material as every temporary installation I had ever been in on every moon and station and transit point where people went to do things that mattered. I put my palm flat against it. Cold, wrong temperature. The wrong kind of cold, not the cold of the observation window on Council Space Verath, not the cold of Calyx 4's night perimeter. A different cold. A cold I did not have a name for yet because I had not been here long enough to learn what this moon's cold meant. I stood there anyway. I thought about the observation window, 41, my palm print fatting. I thought about Cole's map, pressed into my hand, the view from the North Ridge at hour 9 that was something. I thought about the garden, green in alien soil, the clean smell of it. I thought about the whiteboard, 4 lines in 4 different hands, the 4th one slanting slightly uphill. I thought about Vreth 6 sitting with a cup of cooling tea and 12 words, and a cursor blinking, and 30 pages more than he had expected to write. I thought about Arith holding the document with both hands, careful, weight he had not expected. I thought about the junior delegate in the council chamber, looking up from his notes, saying it to himself because it did not fit the model and he needed to hear it out loud. They lost that many and kept fighting. No one answered him. The answer was here. The answer was this wall, this cold, these complaining knees, this palm print warming the gray surface of a building on a moon where something had been decided about what we were and what we were not, and what the galaxy was going to have to find new words for. We were not the impressive thing. We were not the large thing, or the powerful thing, or the thing that won by being more than the other thing. We were the thing that was still here. We were the thing that ran on the names of the people who were not here anymore. We were the thing that built gardens between barracks and armories and named walls, and had strong opinions about coffee and broth temperature, and the correct way to hold a position past the point where any model said you should. The thing the galaxy mocked us for. That was the thing. We ran on it. Vel found me at the wall. He stood a few paces away. He had his data pad. He was not looking at it. He said, "The Senvari delegation has voted to revise the standard metric framework for pre-coalition military assessments." I said, "Good." He said, "It will take time. There is significant disagreement about what the new metrics should measure." I said, "Yes." He said, "I have been assigned to the working group." I said, "Good." He said, "I will need to describe the mechanism, what you told me about the weight, carrying the dead forward, running on the reasons." I said, "Yes." He said, "I don't have language for it yet." I said, "I know." He said, "Did you?" I thought about that. Did we ever have language for it? Did we name it before we needed to explain it to someone who was looking at us from the outside with a data pad and a model that didn't fit? I said, "We have always just called it continuing." He was quiet. He said, "That is not a technical term." I said, "No." He said, "It is not measurable." I said, "Not yet." He looked at the wall, at my palm against it. He said, "Is that a custom, touching the wall?" I said, "No, I just needed to feel something solid." He looked at that for a moment. Then he put his hand next to mine on the wall, flat, palm out, the way I had mine. We stood like that for a while, 2 different species with our hands on a cold wall on a moon where the gravity was close enough, and the knees would complain by week 3. And nothing was resolved and nothing was finished, and the names were still on the document, and the garden was still growing, and Cole's view from the North Ridge was still something even though he was not here to see it. We stood. The wall was cold. We were still there. They mocked the tiny army. They were not wrong about the size. They just did not know what we do with small. So we did this.